Hey guys, so in today's video, I wanted to talk about three major reasons why it sometimes sucks to have to use a wheelchair to get around. So if you see me looking down, I do have my phone with me. I made some notes just to make sure that there were certain things that I didn't leave out of this video. Like I said, I'm only going to share three big reasons, and there are numerous reasons why it sometimes sucks to have to use a wheelchair. I'm not saying that everything is bad about needing a wheelchair, but I would definitely enjoy being able to be more independent, not having to rely on my wheelchair to get around on an everyday basis. But that is another story for another day. The number one issue that I wrote down is accessibility. So, what I wrote here was many places lack proper accessibility, even with the ADA laws. So that could be broken elevators, and a place that you want to go to having a step up to get in, things like that. Narrow doorways that aren't big enough for wheelchairs to get into. Um, Poorly maintained ramps in the winter, which right now it's winter, ramps and handicap accessible areas that are not shoveled off, like the dips in the curb for wheelchairs to get up not being shoveled. Public transportation can also be difficult, I wrote, with limited wheelchair friendly options or staff that doesn't know what sort of availability of options there are. So they might not know that there's something that they could offer to customers who have accessibility issues or disabilities. I also want to say, like, there were a lot of places when I went down to see the liver specialist most recently that did not have the buttons to push so that the doors automatically opened. And a lot of the places, like if I would have been there alone, I would not have been able to get inside, especially with the places where the doors opened outwards. So I have to get super close to the door and then I have to back up to open the door, and then I have to go forward again to go through the door, and that is a very hard process if I was by myself. It was a hard process even with my fiance being there, so I could only imagine how difficult it would have been to be by myself. Thankfully, there are a lot of people who will offer to open doors for you, but it doesn't, like, I want to be as independent as I possibly can be. Like, it's already hard enough that I have a disability that requires me to use a wheelchair every single day. Right now, I'm hoping that I will be able to rehab myself to the point where I can eventually get out of this wheelchair. But as of right now, I use it every day. I use it around the house, I use it everywhere. Um, Even to get out of bed, to go to the bathroom, I have to use a wheelchair. Like, it's not like I'm using this just for, my bad days. I'm using it every single day, all day long while I'm awake. Um, so it's very frustrating to see just kind of how difficult it is to get around tight spaces, places that are not designed well enough for a wheelchair to fit into. Like I said, it is nice that people offer to open the door for you or offer to help you get through the doorway, but if you're someone who values their independence like I do, it sucks having to just kind of hope that there's somebody there who is willing and able to open the door for you. Um, Number two that I am wrote down is social stigma and assumptions that people make about you because you have to use a wheelchair. So I'm going to read the notes that I wrote and then kind of expand on that a little bit. So I wrote that people often treat people in a wheelchair or wheelchair users differently. They make assumptions about their abilities or their independence. Some people speak condescendingly to you, or if you are with someone else, they might speak to the other person instead of speaking to you. Um, some people might avoid you. You get a lot of stares. Most of the stares that I get from people are from kids, and I'm totally fine with that because, of course, kids are curious. They don't understand. Um, they want to know what's wrong with you. And I am completely fine. Like, I would be totally fine if a child came up to me and asked me questions, asked me about my wheelchair, asked what I need it for, things like that. I'm completely fine with that. But when it's adults that, like, you know better, like, you can ask me questions too, but you know better than to sit there and assume that like I am mentally incapable of answering your questions just because I'm in a wheelchair. Speaking to the person who is sitting next to me or standing next to me, or who is with me just because I'm in a wheelchair doesn't make any sense. Um, so the other thing that I wrote is that sometimes people focus on the wheelchair rather than the person themselves, leading to the person in the wheelchair feeling dehumanized or being overlooked. And I can definitely say that that is true because, you know, it's a hard process to get used to being in a wheelchair, but there is so much about it that I feel like people take for granted, um, their independence. Like prior to me being in a wheelchair all the time, like I've been in a wheelchair before, but it was more of like only on bad days type of thing. Um, like right now, this is the worst that I've had it where I've had to be in a wheelchair for as long as this. And having to rely on my wheelchair to get me around and having to rely on other people to help get me places is very frustrating. And I can definitely tell you that it will humble you, and you take so many things for granted. Being able to go out and, go for a drive, travel, do things without having to plan way in advance. Like there are so many things that logistically I have to plan in advance. Like I have to plan if I'm going to travel and need to stay in a hotel or an Airbnb, I have to plan for a handicap accessible stay. I have to plan where I'm going to eat, how I'm going to get food. I have to plan all of the supplies that I need to bring, everything that I need to bring in the car, as long as my wheelchair, all of my medications, everything that I need, the cushions for my wheelchair because I have two cushions. I have a back cushion and a seat cushion. So there's a lot that goes into planning all of this, and it would be so nice to just be able to get up and go whenever I felt like it. The last thing that I wrote, number 3, logistical challenges, like I was just talking about, and the cost. So, wheelchairs are expensive. Maintenance on wheelchairs is expensive, especially if you don't have good insurance. Thankfully, I have insurance that paid for the total cost of this wheelchair that I have. Um, Adaptive equipment is also expensive depending on where you're able to get it from. The only adaptive equipment that I have other than the wheelchair right now is a rocker knife, which allows me to cut things with only one hand. I have been looking into getting some other adaptive equipment, which I can talk more about in another video if you guys are curious. Insurance does not always cover the cost. So, for example, something that you would think that insurance should cover, like a sponge so that you can wash your back if you only have the use of one hand. Insurance doesn't cover that, so you have to buy that. And depending on how often you shower, um, you might have to replace those more often than someone who only showers like twice a week in a nursing home or whatever. And it's just a cost that I think people don't always think about. Everyday activities like travel, like I was talking about, going shopping, um, eating at a restaurant, like there are so many restaurants around here that I would like to try, but I have to do research to try to figure out if they are handicap accessible, if they are wheelchair accessible. I have to figure out what the seating situation looks like. Like, is there room for a wheelchair? We have to plan things around my wheelchair and around the fact that I need to be able to fit into these places. And I don't want people having to carry me in my wheelchair, which people have done since I've gotten out of the hospital. Um, it can be very frustrating. Like I said, it causes a lot of planning ahead of time. You definitely need to plan ahead of time. It can incur more costs depending on what type of accessibility you need. I was able to find a hotel that was handicap accessible, but it was still very hard to get around. And I kind of talked about that in another video. I can go more into detail about that if you guys would like. But the extra cost, added expenses that I listed were finding accessible hotels or accessible Airbnbs, um, uh, accessible vehicles. So, like if you're traveling and you're flying somewhere and you have to rent a vehicle, having to rent an accessible vehicle or a wheelchair van, something like that, can definitely be an added cost. Like for me, I don't think it would necessarily make that much of a difference because I have mastered the car transfer. But for someone who uses a wheelchair who may not be able to do car transfers, that cost could definitely be much more significant. Um, so I just wanted to share those with you guys. That's kind of all of the notes that I had. Hopefully, you guys found this helpful. If you guys would like me to share some other things that I find that suck about being disabled or having a disability or being a wheelchair user, a daily wheelchair user, or just being a wheelchair user in general, I would definitely be willing to share more of my thoughts and insight on this whole process. It is very frustrating. I am still working and hoping that I will eventually be able to use other mobility aids instead of just needing the wheelchair. I know that the one illness that I have, the one chronic illness, is going to kind of ebb and flow. So there may be times where I need to use wheelchair on my bad days, but hopefully I can get out of needing to use a wheelchair daily for just living. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if there's any other topics you would like me to discuss on my channel in the future, and I will talk to you guys in my next video.